Margaret sat across from him in her family's estate, her manicured fingers lazily spinning a wineglass between them. Her expression was calm, almost amused. "If you want a divorce, Robert, then return everything, the company shares, the house, your position, and custody of our son. You leave with nothing." Her mother, seated beside her in a velvet chair, added, "And sign the NDA, we can't have our son-in-law airing dirty laundry in the press." She smiled coldly, as if she expected him to beg. Robert said nothing for a moment. The fireplace behind him crackled, casting faint gold across his face. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a pen, and signed the document. Just like that. Silence fell across the room. The glass in Margaret's hand slipped slightly. "You're agreeing?" she asked, her voice tilting with disbelief. Robert nodded. "Yes." "Just like that," she laughed, more to herself. "No demands, no counter-offers, no last-minute pleas for shared custody or your precious office at the firm?" Her tone was sharp, mocking. "You're bluffing." "I'm not," Robert said flatly. "There's nothing here I want to keep." Margaret blinked. "You'd leave your own son?" "I've already lost him. He started calling Alex Dad 2 weeks ago. You didn't stop him." His voice didn't crack, didn't falter. Her mother sat forward, a hint of concern in her eyes now. "Be reasonable, Robert. You built your life around this family." "I did," he replied, "and now I'm rebuilding it without it." "You'll regret this," Margaret said, crossing her legs, smiling. "That world out there isn't made for people like you. We gave you this life." "You leased it to me," he said, "and the lease is up." He stood slowly, folded the signed papers, and placed them on the crystal coffee table. Then, without so much as a glance back, he pulled off his wedding ring and set it on top. It made a soft clink again. "Send the glass." As he turned to leave, Margaret scoffed, almost amused again. "You'll come crawling back. You won't last a month out there." Robert paused at the door. For a moment, he seemed to consider replying, but then he reached into his coat again, pulled out an old photo of their family, him, Margaret, and their son on a beach, and without a word, tore it in half. The sound echoed louder than it should have. He dropped the pieces into the fireplace, turned the handle, and walked out into the rain. Robert didn't remember the face of his real mother. He only knew she'd wrapped him in a thin, floral sheet and left him at the gate of St. Adele's orphanage when he was a few months old. The caretaker said he was quiet as a baby, hardly cried, and learned to watch people from a distance before speaking. That habit never left him. His earliest memory was of the rusted upright piano in the corner of the orphanage's cold dining hall. He'd press the keys softly after the other children fell asleep. The sound, the way it vibrated through his small chest, was the only thing that ever made him feel heard. By the time he was 17, Robert could play anything by ear. The director took notice and helped him apply to a conservatory. He made it on scholarship, but before he could accept, the orphanage director collapsed, terminal illness. The hospital bill came to $500,000. That was when the proposal came. Margaret's family had been watching him. Her father, a calculating man with ties in real estate and politics, offered him a contract, marry Margaret for 10 years, live under their roof, and act as her husband in name only. Appear in photos, attend events. Sit beside her during family dinners. Be respectable, be silent. For this, they'd pay him $5 million, enough to cover the surgery and send the rest to the orphanage. They never expected him to say yes without hesitation. The contract was signed, no wedding ceremony, just documents and a silent agreement. Margaret didn't look at him when she signed her name. She was still mourning someone, Alex, the man who had left for Europe without a goodbye. In the beginning, Robert kept his distance. He stayed in the guest room, prepared tea when she had headaches, cooked when she was too tired, and filled the house with soft music. He never asked for affection. Never touched her. He thought maybe if he could become a peaked, if feel presence, she'd heal. One night, Margaret came home drenched in rain, mascara running, her hands shaking. She didn't speak, just dropped her bag and collapsed onto the couch. Robert sat beside her without saying a word and began playing Clair de Lune on the grand piano. She fell asleep there, her head tilted toward the sound. She never thanked him. But for the first time, she didn't shut the door behind her the next morning. Years passed like this. He learned how she liked her tea, 1 sugar, no milk. He memorized her routines, helped her with speeches, rehearsed lines with her for public presentations. When she had a stomach ulcer, he stayed up 3 nights in a row, cooking bland soup and wiping her forehead when she sweated through the sheets. He never asked for recognition. He was content with small moments, her silent nods, her lessening scowls. When she found out she was pregnant, she told her mother first. Robert overheard it through the crack of the door. "Don't make a big deal of it, it's just the contract doing what it was supposed to do." He felt something shift in him then, not break, but dull, like a key losing its edge. Their son, Adam, was born in the middle of winter. Robert held him first. Margaret was unconscious from the C-section, and the nurses handed the child to him as a formality. Robert stared at the boy, wrinkled, squirming, breathing, and felt something unspoken stir in his chest. He promised then and there, silently, that no matter what this marriage was or wasn't, the child would never feel abandoned like he had. Adam's first word wasn't mama, it was papa. Robert had taken care of everything, the late-night feedings, the diaper changes, the fever scares. Margaret was there in name, but emotionally distant, always busy, always flying overseas. Still, Robert defended her. "Your mother's working hard," he'd say whenever Adam pouted. "She loves you. Ves you." At some point, Margaret began to look at him like wallpaper, present, functional, easy to ignore. She stopped saying thank you. She never asked if he was eating. He once got food poisoning and fainted in the study. She walked in, stepped over him, and asked where the quarterly reports were. He thought things might change when he composed a song for her birthday, a soft, wordless piano piece he titled Winter Orchid. He played it in their living room while she scrolled through her phone. She listened for a moment, smiled faintly, and said, "You should monetize that. It could go viral." Then she left to meet a friend for dinner. Robert kept playing, not for her, just to remind himself he was still alive. The years turned his face leaner, more tired. His wardrobe became quieter. He stopped attending large events. Soon, Margaret's colleagues thought he was a personal assistant. Their son started referring to him as him in public. At one point, he found a folder hidden behind the wine cabinet. Inside were emails. Margaret and Alex had reconnected. The messages were cold at first, then warmer, then photos, a dinner, a kiss, a promise. He closed the folder and never brought it up. He returned to cooking meals, practicing quietly, smiling at Adam's report cards. He held the house together with silence. Until one day, Adam threw a tantrum over fried chicken, yelled that Uncle Alex was better than him, and called him a loser. Margaret, scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. "Don't take it personally, he's just a kid." Robert didn't respond. He just looked out the window at the rain and realized he'd become invisible. The rain had been relentless that week, tapping against the windows of the house Robert no longer called home. He stood at the stove, pouring Margaret's jasmine tea into her favorite porcelain cup. Behind him, the hallway door opened. A voice, smooth, confident, and far too familiar, called out, "Smells like home already." Robert froze, his hand trembled, tea spilling over the rim. He didn't need to turn around. He knew the voice. Alex had returned. Margaret walked in moments later, umbrella still dripping. "Robert, could you help Alex with his luggage? He'll be staying with us for a few days." A beat of silence. She didn't even look up from her phone. Alex chuckled behind him. "Don't worry, I'll manage. Don't want to inconvenience the house staff." "Staff?" Robert said nothing. He placed the teacup on the counter and left the room. That night, over dinner, Alex took Robert's usual seat at the table. Margaret didn't say a word, neither did Adam. The boy was too busy laughing at Alex's stories, tales of business ventures abroad, luxury cars, models, clubs. Robert served the food quietly, then stood behind them, watching as they devoured his cooking and never acknowledged it. When Adam accidentally spilled his juice, it was Robert who bent down to clean it. Margaret didn't even glance in his direction. The next morning, Robert stepped into the kitchen and found Alex reading the paper at the island, shirtless, comfortable. "Morning," Alex said casually. "Could you brew me some black coffee, no sugar? Margaret says you're good at that." Robert turned back to the coffee machine, wordless. From the living room, Margaret's voice rang out. "Robert, could you iron Adam's uniform? He has his class photos today." Robert had already ironed it, twice. He brought the uniform in silence and found Adam sitting on Alex's lap. Uncle Alex said he'll take me to soccer practice today, Adam beamed. He says he's better than you at coaching. Robert forced a smile. That's great. Later that night, as he walked past the guest room, he overheard laughter. Margaret and Alex, their voices muffled through the door, but distinct. She still thinks he's part of the family, Alex said between chuckles. You seriously kept him around for 10 years? He was necessary, Margaret replied. Back then, my parents were obsessed with stability. They didn't want another scandal. You called him your therapy dog. I said that once, she laughed. He kept the house clean, played piano, looked good in photos, and he was obedient, quiet. So, a temporary husband. Robert didn't stay to hear the rest. He walked back to the study, shut the door, and sat down. That night, he retrieved a folder from the bottom drawer, the one he had never touched in 10 years. Inside it was a blank divorce template. He printed it, filled in the names, left the asset column empty. He stared at the line for Margaret's signature, then folded it neatly and placed it under the table where she usually set her purse. The next morning, she walked right past it. When Alex's luggage grew, Margaret told Robert to move his own belongings to the study permanently. Alex needs the guest room, she said without emotion. Robert complied. He packed quietly. She didn't ask why. Adam stopped saying dad. He now called Robert him, occasionally, the cook. Uncle Alex said you don't even work, you just clean and stay home. I manage the accounts, Robert said softly. That's not a job, Adam replied. Robert said nothing. He began taking longer walks, hours at a time. Sometimes he wandered down to the lake, sat by the reeds, and just stared at the ripples. Sometimes he brought sheet music and composed in silence. Other times, he brought nothing. He simply needed to exist, where no one could see him. The house grew louder, Alex's laugh echoing in the halls, Margaret's heels tapping down the staircase, the front door slamming shut as the three of them left for outings, restaurants, parties, weekend getaways. Robert always stayed behind. He cooked, cleaned, watered the garden, played piano to the walls. One evening, Adam stormed in, furious that his video game account had been banned. Robert tried to help reset the password, but Adam shoved him away. Don't touch my stuff, you're not my dad. Margaret, who had been on a video call, muted herself for a second and said, Robert, stop bothering him. Robert stood there, nodding. That night, he stood outside the bedroom door, his former room. Inside, Margaret and Alex were watching a movie, laughter spilling into the hallway. The glow of the screen flickered under the doorframe. He turned away, walked to the study, and began to pack. Clothes, notebooks, a few photos he had kept for himself, not of Margaret, but of Adam as a baby. Before the distance, before the rot. He packed his instruments carefully, wrapping each piece in cloth. His keyboard, the folders of old compositions, and the sketchpad where he'd drawn Margaret sleeping once, back when he thought there was still a chance. He placed the sealed divorce envelope on the kitchen counter. Next to it, he left the ironed school uniform, folded with coal. Ray. Then, with nothing more than a glance at the cold, glowing house around him, Robert slipped out the back door, quietly, like a man who had always been leaving. Robert didn't take the front gate when he left. He exited through the side door, where the hydrangeas he had planted 3 years ago were beginning to wilt. He paused, touched one gently, and whispered, "You'll bloom again next spring." The cab waited silently under the shade of the sycamore trees. He placed 2 bags in the trunk, one of clothes, the other filled with manuscripts, music sheets, and his portable keyboard. He didn't turn back to look at the house. There was nothing left there that hadn't already been stripped from him. He didn't leave a letter. He didn't announce anything. No dramatic departure, just silence. His first stop was the orphanage. The sky was pale blue, the afternoon sun brushing the courtyard in gold. Children ran barefoot over cracked stone, chasing each other with plastic rings. The director, now older and slower, sat under a faded parasol, her knitting needles moving gently in her lap. When she saw Robert, she didn't speak, she simply stood and opened her arms. He walked into them. For a long time, neither of them said anything. When they finally parted, she looked into his eyes and said, "So it's finally over?" He nodded. "I'm sorry," she said. "You always told me," Robert whispered, "don't stay in a house where no one notices when you bleed." He handed her an envelope. "What's this?" "The rest of the contract money. I never spent it. It's yours now. Use it for the children." You'll need it, she protested. He smiled faintly. I've already bought time, that's all I wanted. She reached for his hand, calloused and thin. Where will you go? Somewhere quiet. I need to find out if I still exist. The next morning, Robert boarded a small regional train and headed into the hills beyond the city, to a secluded studio owned by an old professor. It was a wooden cabin tucked between fields of wildflowers and thick pine forest. The air smelled like wet earth and something he couldn't name, maybe freedom. Inside, there was nothing but a desk, a piano, and silence. Perfect. He unpacked slowly, placed his old notebook beside the piano, and sat in front of the keys. His fingers hovered, trembling at first, like touching something fragile, then a single note, then another, then a chord. He played. For the first time in years, the music didn't sound like background. It wasn't for an audience. It wasn't to soothe someone else. It was his. He played until his fingers went numb. He slept on the floor that night, wrapped in a wool blanket, listening to the wind. The next day, he wrote a song. He didn't name it. It had no lyrics, just a series of low, grieving tones that climbed, softly, cautiously, into something tender, almost hopeful, and then collapsed back again. It sounded like goodbye. He titled it Opus for No One. While Robert found solace in quiet, the Liu estate was sinking in noise. On the second day of his absence, Margaret walked into the kitchen and frowned. No coffee, no eggs, no breakfast laid out on the table like usual. She called for Robert, no answer. She opened the fridge, empty shelves. The uniform for Adam's school was missing. So were the piano sounds that usually filled the hall by mid-morning. She checked the study. His desk was cleared. Only dust remained where his lamp used to be. In the dining room, the signed divorce papers waited, untouched. She picked them up, confused. The signature was real. So was hers, from last week. She vaguely remembered Robert handing her a form as she texted Alex about dinner plans. She had signed it without reading. "What is this?" she murmured. That afternoon, she tried to call. The number was out of service. By evening, Margaret stood at the door with a coat over her shoulders, looking into the rain, as if he might walk back up the steps and ask what she wanted for dinner. He didn't. Adam noticed next. "Where's the cook?" he asked casually. "Don't call him that," Margaret said. "Well, where is he?" "I don't know." That night, their dinner arrived in takeout containers, cold and greasy. Margaret picked at it, said nothing. The next morning, she got a call from Adam's school. He'd arrived in an unwashed uniform, no lunch packed. He had lied and said his father would bring it later. Margaret paused for a long time after the call ended. She looked around the silent house. It had never felt this large before. In the countryside, Robert lit candles by the window and recorded a second track. This one was lighter. He called it Unspoken Things. He played thinking of everything he never said, the nights he sat beside Margaret while she cried for someone else, the morning she smiled at Alex the way she never smiled at him, the way Adam had screamed at him that he was nothing. He played through it all, and somehow, by the third night, the pain didn't make him feel smaller, it made him feel clearer. He no longer belonged to anyone. No one owned his silence anymore. When he finished the composition, he exported the file, sent it to a studio he admired in Vienna, and closed the laptop. Then he stepped outside into the wind and breathed so deeply it hurt. For the first time in 10 years, Robert was finally alone with himself, and it was beautiful. The ballroom shimmered in gold, velvet curtains framed the massive arched windows, and a string quartet played softly on the far side of the room. The Liu Foundation's annual gala was the most important event of the year, attended by foreign investors, high-ranking officials, and every socialite desperate to prove their relevance. Margaret moved effortlessly through the crowd in a silver gown, her hair in a polished updo. Her smile was composed, professional, and utterly hollow. Alex stood at her side, greeting guests with the charm of someone who'd memorized every name in the room. He laughed, offered handshakes, even kissed a few gloved hands. Adam trailed behind them, dressed in a tiny tuxedo, bored and restless. Margaret's assistant leaned over and whispered, "The family representative from Vianora Holdings is here. He's asked to deliver a file directly to Mr. Wang. He says it's urgent." Margaret turned sharply. "Robert?" He RSVP'd, said he would come to collect the final notarized contract for the divorce. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly around her clutch. "Let him come." When Robert entered the ballroom, the temperature shifted by a fraction. He wore a black suit, simple, well-fitted, with no tie. His hair was slightly longer than usual, brushed neatly back, and his posture was elegant but distant. The faintest limp in his left leg betrayed a recent injury. Heads turned, conversations paused. He didn't smile, didn't bow, just walked slowly toward the organizer's table near the front, where the document awaited. Margaret didn't move, but her eyes followed him like a hawk. Alex, spotting him, smirked and stepped forward. "Well, well, look what the rain dragged in." His voice was loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Didn't expect you to show your face at a place like this." Robert remained quiet. His eyes flicked once toward Alex, then to the document in the assistant's hand. Alex laughed again. "Still the silent type. You know, I always admired that, obedient, humble, just the way Margaret likes her help." Margaret winced. Adam, now emboldened by the crowd, stepped forward beside Alex. "You're not even in this family anymore," the boy said loudly. "Why are you even here?" Robert didn't answer. He took the file, nodded to the assistant, and turned to leave. "Didn't even say hi," Alex called out mockingly. "At least thank us for raising your standard of living." The guests chuckled. Robert paused, then turned back, slowly. His voice was calm. "You're right." Alex's grin widened. "I should thank you," Robert continued. "If I had stayed any longer, I wouldn't have become the man I am now. It's easy to forget yourself when you're too busy serving others." Alex's smile faltered. Robert looked down at Adam, not with anger, but with distance. "One day you'll understand what it means to push someone until they vanish. I hope it doesn't cost you what it cost me." He left without another word. Margaret didn't follow, not yet. She stood frozen in the middle of the laughter and glitter, but it all sounded muted. Her hands trembled slightly. The document Robert had taken, she remembered signing it, not reading it, signing. Later that night, when the guests had dispersed and the air in the ballroom was thick with spilled champagne and perfume, she returned to the table where Robert had stood. Her assistant approached, hesitant. "There's something you should see," she said. Margaret took the file the assistant offered, a copy of the notarized divorce papers. She flipped through the pages slowly, her breath shortening. Everything was there, all of it legally binding. Robert had relinquished everything. The house, the shares in her father's company, custody of Adam. All without negotiation, no requests, no settlements, just silence. And her signature, scrawled across the bottom page. She had signed without even knowing. Her heart began to pound. She felt dizzy, sick. But that wasn't the end of it. When she arrived home that evening, she went looking, through the drawers, through the locked cabinet behind the wine rack, and she found the envelope. Inside were two documents. One was a contract dated 12 years earlier, signed by her father and Robert. Terms: 10 years of marriage, public appearances, discretion, loyalty, no interference in Margaret's personal relationships, payment, $5 million, purpose, to protect Margaret's reputation after her mental breakdown when Alex fled to Europe. She stared at the paper for a long time, her fingers tightened around the edges until they creased. So it had always been business. Her marriage was never real. And yet, it had been. Robert had been there when no one else was. Cooked when she couldn't move, sat by her bed when she was hospitalized for stress. He was the only person who ever remembered her food allergies without needing to be reminded. He never raised his voice, never demanded anything. He just existed. Quietly. Steadily. Until now. The second document was a notarized wire transfer. From Robert. To the orphanage. The full $5 million, returned in full. He had taken nothing. Margaret collapsed onto the couch, her breath hitched, her throat closed. What kind of man gives back the price of his humiliation? She didn't know whether to cry or scream. Upstairs, Adam was watching a movie on his tablet. He shouted down, "Mom, can Uncle Alex sleep over again tonight?" Margaret didn't respond. She stood, walked to the hallway, and opened the door to the guest room. Alex was inside, shirtless again, brushing his teeth. "You didn't tell me the marriage was contractual," she said quietly. Alex paused. She stepped further inside. "You knew, didn't ye? Ow? You knew the whole time." He shrugged, not turning. "Of course, your father told me years ago." Her lips parted, stunned. "And you never said anything?" He turned to face her now. "Why would I? It worked for me. You had a husband who kept you clean. I had a way back into your life." "You used me," she whispered. He gave a half smile. "So did you. We all use each other, Margaret. Don't act like you're any different." She slapped him. Hard. Alex didn't flinch. He just sighed. "This is what you do, isn't it? Push away the one person who stayed, and now the one who came back." She whispered, more to herself than to him. "You never really loved me." "No," he said. "But I loved your name, and your credit score." He walked out of the room, leaving her standing in the dim light. She walked slowly back to the study. Robert's empty chair sat beside the piano bench, the keys untouched, the air too quiet. For the first time in her life, Margaret wanted to speak, and there was no one left to hear her. The grand concert hall in Vienna shimmered under chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. 1,000 guests sat in silence, mesmerized by the man at the Steinway. His fingers danced across the keys, not with showmanship but with soul. Each note carried 10 years of silence, 10 years of sacrifice, and 10 years of being unseen. Robert, now dressed in a sleek black tuxedo with silver cufflinks shaped like violin F-holes, looked nothing like the man Margaret once tossed aside like a worn-out coat. He didn't glance at the front row where they sat, Margaret, David, and Alex. They had flown across continents, crashing into his new world, desperate to reclaim what they discarded. But Robert? He only saw the piano. Beside him on the stage stood Melissa, dressed in an elegant burgundy gown. Her cello sang in harmony with Robert's composition, a new piece titled Resonance. The crowd burst into applause as the final note rang out like a bell marking the end of a war. Backstage, the air shifted. "Robert!" Margaret called out. Her voice cracked, mascara already smudged, her heels clicking across the marble as if chasing a ghost. "Please, I didn't know." He turned slowly, his face unreadable, his eyes hollow and distant. "Didn't know what?" "That you were suffering, that we hurt you." She looked at David, nudging him forward. "Say something, apologize." David stepped up awkwardly. I didn't know you were famous now." Robert let out a quiet scoff. "So, if I wasn't famous, your apology wouldn't come?" He looked at the boy who once called Alex Dad. "You don't get to crawl back now that the stage has lights and your mother's brand is collapsing." David's fists clenched. "You abandoned us." Melissa took a step forward. "He didn't abandon you, you erased him." "Shut up," David snapped. "Who even are you?" Robert's hand came down before the last syllable left David's mouth. A sharp slap echoed in the hallway, the kind that didn't just sting skin, it shattered delusion. "You don't talk to her that way," Robert said, voice low. "She's the one who picked me up from nothing, who heard my music when your mother chose silence." David held his cheek, stunned. Robert stepped back. "You're not my son. You stopped being that the moment you called another man dad and spat on me in front of your school." Margaret's lips trembled. "I was wrong, Robert, I was blind. I let Alex—" "Margaret," he interrupted. "You don't get to say my name like we're equals now." Her legs buckled. She dropped to her knees, hands clasped. Cameras began flashing from the lobby windows as whispers filled the air. "I'll do anything. Just please come home. I'll tear up the new marriage certificate. I'll make David apologize live. You already signed everything that mattered," he cut in. 10 years ago, your parents bought me for $5 million to play husband. I played that role until the curtain fell. I didn't know it was just a contract." He nodded. "Exactly. You never bothered to ask." Alex stepped forward, awkward and furious. "What is this? Some pity act? You were nothing, Robert. You were hired help." Melissa's arm locked around Robert's. And now he owns the stage you beg on. The doors to the hall opened again, and Ava walked in, small, innocent, clutching a bouquet of white tulips. Her presence silenced the room like snowfall. She ran up to Robert, and he lifted her gently. "Did you like the song?" She nodded. It sounded like rain turning into sunshine. Melissa smiled, stroking the girl's hair. Margaret stared at the child. "Who is she?" "My daughter," Robert said without hesitation. "But she's not blood." "She's family," he replied coldly. "Blood betrayed me, this child saved me." He turned to leave. Margaret's voice cracked again. "I still love you." He paused. "No, Margaret, you love the idea of me, now that I'm seen. You love the absence, not the presence. That's not love, that's regret." She collapsed fully, sobbing on the polished floor, her tears ignored by the world watching. Melissa leaned in. "He's not yours to apologize to anymore." As they walked out into the snowy Vienna night, Ava's laughter echoed into the dark. Melissa slipped her hand into Robert's. "Ready for our next tour stop?" He nodded. "Let's play something brighter." The lights of the hall dimmed behind them. The ghosts of the past remained locked within, kneeling, crying, and forgotten. The headlines stopped screaming her name, the flashbulbs no longer chased her, the world had moved on, and so had he. Margaret sat alone in her penthouse-turned-prison, the marble floors echoing with nothing but her own heartbeat. Outside her building, the press had vanished. Even Alex had fled the country again, this time with someone younger and richer. Her staff had quit. David, her once proud son, now stayed in boarding school abroad, and not because she asked him to. He asked to leave, and Robert hadn't stopped him. Every morning, Margaret sent a bouquet of the rarest blue roses to a music studio in Vienna. And every evening, a staff member sent back a single picture, the flowers in a trash bin. She tried everything, legal tricks, emotional traps, media interviews spun with crocodile tears. "I was naive. He was my quiet protector. We made mistakes." But Robert stayed silent. Even when David mailed Robert a stack of handwritten apology letters, begging for a chance to talk, not a single reply came. And that silence was Margaret's true punishment. It wasn't loud revenge. It was being erased from someone's life so completely, she didn't even have the power to grieve out loud. Across the ocean, Robert's world bloomed in a different key. The orphanage director called him one afternoon. A girl named Ava, the same child who once clutched his finger with desperate innocence during a winter visit, was now ready for placement. No relatives, no paperwork hurdles, just waiting for someone to choose her. Robert said yes before the director finished the sentence. When he told Melissa, she didn't speak. She just wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her head against his back. "You're not replacing anyone," she whispered. "You're becoming everything." The adoption ceremony was small, held in the orphanage chapel, white lilies lining the wooden pews. Ava wore a cream dress and matching shoes that clicked excitedly on the marble floor as she walked up to the podium. She stood between Melissa and Robert, holding both their hands. "I don't remember where I came from," she said, reading from a little card, "but now I know where I'm going." Robert knelt and hugged her, tears silently running down his cheeks. In the front row, the orphanage staff clapped softly. No cameras, no statements, no performances, just a man, a woman, and a child who no longer had to beg to be loved. Weeks passed. Then came the final concert. The Vienna State Opera House was sold out before tickets were even officially released. The evening had no guest performers, no gimmicks, just Robert. The world wanted to hear him alone. Margaret was there too, dressed in black, hair tied in a loose knot, eyes bare of makeup. She wore no perfume, only silence and self-loathing. She didn't use her name to get in, didn't flash a badge or a brand, just bought a seat in the shadows with money that now meant nothing. On stage, Robert played the piano like a man harvesting light from heartbreak. Each key was a page from his diary, ripped out and turned into sound. His posture never faltered, his hands never trembled. Ava sat beside Melissa in the front row, legs swinging, eyes glowing with admiration. And when it ended, when the audience rose like a wave in ovation, Margaret did not clap, she watched. As the curtains fell and the backstage door opened, Robert passed by her. For a moment, she dared to breathe, to hope. But he walked past her like she was air. No pause, no glance, not even a trace of recognition. Margaret stood frozen in the aisle, her hands limp at her sides, her throat tight with a scream she no longer had the right to release. Outside, the snow had just begun to fall. Robert stepped into the cold with Melissa holding his hand and Ava skipping beside them. They looked like the portrait of a man who had never been broken, only delayed. Margaret exited through the rear gate, alone. No one followed her. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement. She reached for her phone, opened her gallery, and found a photo from years ago, Robert playing piano in their dim living room while she sat scrolling through her phone. She had never really watched him. She thought he was background noise. Now he was the headline of the world, and she was nobody. Margaret paused near the street lamp, looked up at the night sky, and whispered to herself, "I thought I owned him, but I never knew him at all." The snow swallowed her voice, and no one heard her fall apart.